My name is Beth Kim. One of the first few cases I worked on might haunt me forever. Before I was an agent with the FBI, I was an Army CID agent. The deceased don't bother me. It's the people left behind. I stood, staring out the window of Jack's office toward the Salt Lake City skyline, as Tom, the coroner, rattled off his findings at a pace only he and Jack could tolerate. Jack Garn, my senior and the lead investigator, had been the one to walk the crime scene. A mummified body had been found by a group of biologists in the northwest quadrant of Red Cliffs Conservation Area in Utah. The body was female, posed, her arms draped across her stomach, a bouquet of desert wildflowers in her clutch. She was wedged into a crevice about 7 feet overhead, out of reach of wild animals. The coroner reported that she was emaciated but showed no signs of abuse or other signs of trauma. Her cause of death, he suggested, was nothing more than a mere inner ear infection with a high fever. Her life could have been saved if someone had simply taken her to the emergency room for antibiotics. In the case of Red Cliff's Jane Doe, there were so many moments when her life could have gone differently. But then, can't that be said for all of us? Thanks, Tom. Please keep me updated if you learn anything more, Jack murmured. Jack picked up the handset and set it back onto the cradle, hanging up on Tom. Though Jack and I had only worked on a few cases together, by then I could genuinely say I liked Jack. I had begun to consider him a friend. Beth, Jack sighed, rubbing his forehead with the fingers of his right hand. I have a strange feeling this case is going to be complicated and weird. Me too, Jack. Me too. Well, I guess we should go home and see where this case takes us tomorrow, Jack groaned. I had nothing to add. I nodded and we left for the day, heading in opposite directions, Jack to the suburbs and me to the lively city. Jack beat me to the office only by a few minutes. He had obviously been waiting for me. The moment I stepped onto our floor, Jack called for me through his open office door. I briskly stepped toward his office and shut the door behind me. Tom was able to get prints off Red Cliff's Jane Doe. Look, she's from your world. Tom gestured at his computer screen. It was a missing persons flyer from 5 years prior. She was, indeed, from my world, in more ways than one. Primrose Carter, missing June 9th, 2017, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. 5'0", 108 pounds, black hair, brown eyes, female, Asian Pacific Islander, age 29. Read the flyer. An entire human being boiled down to a few bullet points. Jack clicked on the link sent over by the forensics team. It was a good quality CCTV video clip. The woman known as Primrose Carter stepped out of a red Volkswagen Beetle, wearing a tailored navy trench dress and 4-inch pumps. Her dark wavy hair was more brownish red than black. She looked a lot younger than 29. She walked briskly from her car toward the camera when something from out of shot, north of the camera, caught her attention. She gave a shy wave and hesitated before slowly heading toward whoever, or whatever, was beckoning her. "Wasn't that your last duty station?" Jack asked. "Did you know the investigator that worked this case?" "Yeah, I was there. I was working on a different case, but I remember how big of a deal that case was, at least among us at CID. Bragg always went through these weird spells of exoricide. I remember seeing Sergeant Carter when they brought him in for questioning. I didn't like him. I thought he was arrogant. I was so sure he had done it. There was nothing to connect him to the case. How the hell did she end up here in Utah, all the way from North Carolina?" "Right. Also, if she'd been living way out there near Red Cliffs, she'd stand out like a sore thumb. A small Asian woman in Mormon country? That's unusual. Can you get the file for this case from Bragg by chance?" Beth, you're a genius. We should probably go to the public about this. You're right. She would have stood out way out there. That day, I was able to get what little remained of the case file. Jack made an announcement on the local news asking for tips. Neither of us expected much. As we wrapped up our day, the Washington County Sheriff's Department called. There was a rancher at their office with information about Red Cliff's Jane Doe. He claimed she was his daughter-in-law. Early the next morning, Jack and I headed south toward Washington County. The rancher that rose to greet us was well into his 70s, but he was as hard as the land around him. He stood 6 feet 2 inches, only 2 inches more than Jack and 4 inches more than me. His build was impressive and a little intimidating. Even in his 70s, the rancher's shoulders were wide. He was a muscular man. I am not attracted to men, but I am not blind to facts. He had been a handsome man in his younger years. He had a full head of silver hair, crystal blue eyes, and a chiseled face. "Thank you for seeing us this morning," Jack greeted, amiably. The rancher gave a curt nod before crossing his beefy arms across his barrel chest. "My name is Agent Jack Garn with the Utah FBI. Jack introduced himself. "I'm Agent Beth Kim, also Utah FBI, I added. "Yosef Ryan," the rancher introduced himself. "Now, you spoke with the sheriff's deputy yesterday and said that our Jane Doe was your daughter-in-law?" Jack began. "Yes." "Can you tell us how she ended up out in the Red Cliffs Conservation Area, Mr. Ryan?" Jack asked. Mr. Ryan's lower jaw clamped tight to keep the quiver at bay. Still, the involuntary spasm broke through. "My boy, he's a good boy. Loves his wife and son. He ain't right in the head. Hasn't been right for a long time. When Rosie got sick..." Mr. Ryan swallowed hard. "When Rosie got sick this last time, my boy just went off the deep end. He dropped off my grandson and just held Rosie until she passed. We kept telling him he needed to take Rosie to the doctors. He kept saying, 'They'll take her away from me.' Rosie died, and then my boy must have put her out there. Like I said, he hasn't been right in the head. He would never hurt Rosie, but it isn't beyond him to bury her in such a strange way," Mr. Ryan confided. "Can we speak to your son?" Jack asked, treading lightly. "No, I don't need you hauling him in here like a criminal. He's had a hard life. I just came here to see if I can take my daughter-in-law home, so we can give her a proper burial. She needs to be with her family. My grandson needs to know where to find his mother." Jack slowly shook his head. "Mr. Ryan, I can't do that. You see, Rosie is a missing person in the state of North Carolina. Her name is Primrose Carter. I would love to give your grandson his mother back, but before I can legally do that, I need some questions answered. I need to know how Rosie ended up here in Utah, all the way from North Carolina. I need to know why she never contacted her husband or friends back home to tell them she was alive and well." "No," Mr. Ryan scoffed. "She's my son's wife, Primrose Ryan. You're mistaken." Jack gave another slow, deliberate shake of the head. "No, Mr. Ryan, we ran her fingerprints. She is Primrose Carter, no doubt about it. She was a soldier, too. We matched her DNA to the database. She is, in fact, Primrose Carter," Jack assured. Mr. Ryan rose and flew to the door. He hurried out of the interview room. My heart ached for him. What parent didn't want the best for their child? He had come in search of healing for his grandson and had accidentally torn a hole through which the unknown was quickly leaking. The Ryans owned thousands of acres of land. It took nearly 10 minutes from the main road to reach the Ryan homestead. It was an adobe compound, complete with a walled-in courtyard and several wings of living quarters. Jack and I had an inkling we would not be welcomed with open arms at the Ryan ranch. We were right. The moment Jack and I pulled up to the house, the front gate to the courtyard opened, and out stepped Mr. Ryan and 6 other men, 3 equally as large as him, and 3 larger. They were all remnants of the Old West, a rancher and his gang of cowboys. Jack stepped out, and I followed. A little boy, about 4 years old, broke free from the legs that were meant to keep him inside the courtyard. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him. He flung his little arms out and shouted, in a raspy voice, "Mama!" Before throwing his arms around my leg, he squinted up at me with honey-colored, quizzical eyes, and then began to cry. You're not my mama," the little boy said softly, his lower lip quivering before tears rolled down his rosy cheeks. One of the cowboys stepped forward and hurried to pick up the boy. He smoothed the boy's shaggy dark brown hair away from his little face and kissed him on the forehead. "No, son, that is not your mama," the cowboy murmured softly. "I want my mama," the boy whimpered, throwing his arms around his father's thick neck. The cowboy before us fought back tears and gently set his boy on the ground to stand on his own long legs. His crystal blue eyes glanced up toward us. "I'll come with you. Could I just get my son inside, please? I don't want him to see me carted off like a criminal," the cowboy pleaded. Jack gave him a gentle nod. The cowboy held his son by the shoulders. The boy was only 4, but he would grow to an intimidating size like his father and the rest of the men in his family. The boy desperately grasped for any kind of hold on his father. "No, Daddy, please don't leave me," the boy shouted. "David, David," the cowboy cooed. "I'm not leaving you. I'll be back soon. Look at me." The cowboy raised the boy's chin so he was forced to look at him. "You see these 2 folks here? They're from the FBI. They're going to help me find your mama." The boy looked from Jack to me before wiping his tears away with balled fists. I don't know why. Perhaps I saw so much of Primrose Carter in the boy. Or perhaps children have a way of bringing out the humanity in us all. I knelt down and produced my badge from my pocket and showed him the seal next to my photo. "David," I said softly, "you see this? It means I'm one of the good guys. I'm good at finding people." "Like the Lone Ranger?" he asked, though he pronounced Ranger with a W. I gave him my most comforting smile. "I'm more like Tonto," I whispered. David gave his eyes and cheeks one last swipe, sniffled, and then gave me a crooked smile, his mother's smile. "Buddy," the cowboy whispered, gently butting heads with his son, "can you do me a favor? Can you go back inside and be a good boy for Nana?" Sadly, the boy nodded and slowly turned toward the house. When the boy disappeared back into the courtyard, the cowboy let us put him in our car. "Don't say anything, boy. I've got a lawyer coming to meet you," Mr. Ryan called to his son before I shut the door. Joseph Tucker Ryan was not what anyone would imagine as a criminal. He wasn't some raving lunatic with crazed eyes and violent thrashing. He was calm and quiet, almost childlike in his mannerisms. He was a handsome man who must have broken many hearts during his 20 years of globe-trotting. His hair, like his son's, was shaggy, but a lighter shade of brown. He was a younger, slimmer, and taller version of his father, Joseph. He had a 5 o'clock shadow, indicating he still shaved every day, a habit from his army days. We drove him to the Washington County Sheriff's Department for questioning. He was silent. Even his crying was silent. Seldom do we ever have people give themselves up so easily. I wondered, what was the end goal? From the outside looking in, he looked normal. Nothing about him gave any clues as to why he did any of the things he did in the last 5 years. It wasn't until he shot me a cold, icy glance that I began to see the irrational side of him. "Joseph Tucker Ryan," Jack began. "I don't want her in here," he hiccuped. "This is Agent Kim. She is my partner," Jack introduced me. "No, she's one of them. She's coming to take Rosie and David away from me. Mr. Ryan. Just Tuck. Tuck? What do you mean by them? She's with the Army. She's coming to take Rosie and David away from me, Tuck explained. Suddenly, I saw and began to understand. He was a little delusional and paranoid. No, Tuck, I work for the FBI, I explained, though I was a little unsettled as to how he knew I was former Army. We women don't often carry signs of our service as men do. Tuck turned his face away from me. Okay, Jack. I'll be right outside if you need me, I said softly to Jack. He gave me a slight nod. Jack waited until I shut the door before he cleared his throat, garnering Tuck's attention. Tuck didn't know I could watch the whole interview through the cameras above their heads from an adjoining room. He looked slightly relieved, his brows relaxing. Tuck, I'm going to ask you some questions, so I'm going to read you your Miranda rights. Is that all right? Jack asked softly. Tuck nodded, but still didn't meet Jack's eyes. Jack fished around in his pocket and handed Tuck a small, laminated card for good measure. Now, Tuck, can you read along with me? Jack asked. I knew from experience that Jack only gave the card to interviewees he wanted to check for mental acuity. Tuck's eyes turned toward the card in front of him. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to speak to an attorney and to have an attorney present during any questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be provided for you at government expense. Do you understand? Do you have any questions for me? I understand my rights, Agent Garn. My lawyer is on his way. Ask me anything you want. Tuck sobbed. We found Primrose Carter out in the Red Cliffs Conservation Area. Can you tell me how she ended up there? Tuck's lower lip quivered. Her name is Primrose Ryan. She's my wife. Rosie got sick after she had the baby. She got really sick. Rosie went through these dark moods. They were less when she had David. She must have loved David a lot, huh? Jack asked softly. Tuck smiled weakly and nodded almost childishly. I thought I'd never see Rosie smile again. Then she had David, and she was so happy. She always held him, sang to him. She was even nice to me again. At first, she wouldn't let me touch David, but after I showed her I could take care of him when she got sick after David was born, she let me hold him. I loved seeing Rosie smile, Agent Garn. She was happier for a little bit. Then she got pregnant with the second baby and she became sad again. When Rosie got dark, she stopped eating sometimes. The baby was born prematurely. Rosie became sad and moody again. Not even David could make her smile. Whenever Rosie stopped eating, she often got sick. It was often her left ear that gave her trouble. She'd recovered before. This last time, she just got worse and worse. Why didn't you take her to the doctor, Tuck? Tuck shook his head vehemently. No, the doctor would have called the Army and they would have taken her from me, Tuck protested. Agent Garn, I love Rosie. I drove all the way to the Salt Lake City VA to get antibiotics. I got her antibiotics. I was on my way back. By the time I got home, Rosie didn't even recognize me anymore. I held her and she couldn't even look at me. I said, Rosie, I love you. I brought you back some medicine. But she couldn't keep anything down, not even water. I couldn't get her to take the medicine. I stayed up with her all night. By morning, Tuck broke down in tears, covering his face. I took Rosie out to Red Cliffs. I used to hike the trails when I was a boy, no bigger than David. I put her high up so predators couldn't get to her. I didn't want to put Rosie in the ground. Rosie doesn't belong in the ground. Did you hurt Rosie, Tuck, before you took her out to Red Cliffs? Tuck shook his head. No, Rosie had already died. How did you know for sure? I was a soldier, Agent Garn. I know what dead people look like. Rosie gave out a few agonal breaths and then she just died. I checked her pulse and listened for a heartbeat. Agent Garn. I waited for hours until I knew for sure I wasn't going to leave my wife to die out there. Just then, Tuck's lawyer opened the door and stepped in unannounced. "Tuck," his lawyer murmured softly, kneeling before him. "Your daddy sent me. You don't have to say any more to these folks." Yosef later stated that Tuck's lawyer brought him home. The first thing Tuck did was go in search of David, who was getting ready for bed with his grandmother. David was in the middle of brushing his teeth. Toothbrush in hand, he ran to his father and threw his arms around Tuck, toothbrush and toothpaste smearing across Tuck's back. "Daddy, you came back!" David cheered. "I will always come back to you, David." "Davy," Mrs. Ryan tittered through tears, "you're getting toothpaste all over your daddy." "Sorry, Daddy," David apologized. "That's okay," Tuck assured. David returned to his grandmother's side and finished brushing his teeth before Tuck led him into the bedroom that had once been Tuck's. Tuck's old bedroom ceiling was painted like the night sky. Tuck had dreamt of being an astronaut as a boy. His son, David, dreamt of being the Lone Ranger. Mrs. Ryan kept the night sky but layered David's love of the Old West over Tuck's collection of NASA memorabilia. Tuck put David to bed, opening Why Cowboys Sleep with Their Boots On, and began reading. When Tuck finished the book, he curled himself around his son and waited for him to fall asleep. "Daddy, I missed you." "I missed you too, buddy." "Daddy, did you find Mama?" "No, buddy. I didn't find her." "Does Mama miss me?" "Yes, Davy, Mama misses you," Tuck assured. "Did I ever tell you about the day you were born?" David had heard the story many times, but he giggled and waited patiently for his father to tell the story once more. "I wrapped you up in your blankie and gave you to your mama. She smiled at you and said, 'Hello, David, I'm your mama. I love you more than all the stars in the sky.' And she always will." "Daddy, I love you more than all the stars in the night sky," David said, pointing to the ceiling. "I'm going to be a cowboy like you. I'm going to ride my horse and sleep with my boots on. I'm going to find Mama." Tuck cried silently as he held his son. He held his son until the boy fell asleep before he crept out of bed and made his way to the kitchen. He found a notepad and began writing his replay of events. He took his Glock 45 from its holster and made his way to the courtyard and opened the gate. He did not want his son to find him, so he made his way out toward the barn, knowing David was not allowed that far yet. "Tuck!" his mother called to his back. "Yosef, get out here now!" Yosef and two of Tuck's older brothers made their way to the courtyard. "Where are you going, boy?" Yosef asked, his sharp eyes noticing the pistol in his son's right hand. "Just a walk, Dad," Tuck lied. "Tuck, can I have the Glock?" one of his brothers asked. As though seeing it for the first time, Tuck looked down at his right hand. "Tuck, David needs you," Yosef said to his son. Tuck shook his head and began to cry. "Everything they said about me is true. I made a mess of everything. I'm the reason David doesn't have his mama. I took Rosie, Dad. Rosie never wanted me," Tuck confessed. "That's okay, son. David wants you. I want you. Your mama, your brothers, we all want you." Tuck hung his head and raised the pistol to his temple. "David deserves better. He doesn't need what I did hanging over him." It took the sheriff's department and paramedics 15 minutes to arrive at the Ryan Ranch. In my experience, soldiers like Tuck, who had a great deal of drive and determination in life, carried that attitude into death too. Jack and I sat and reviewed the picture that was coming together with the prosecution team. Tuck's military record, including all the psychological tests he'd been given throughout his career, spoke of a highly intelligent, highly skilled, determined man. His ASVAB GT score was 140 at age 17. His IQ test at age 21 was 169. He spoke Russian, Spanish, and French fluently and was on his way to mastering American Sign Language. He had joined the Army as an infantryman. After one tour with the 82nd Airborne Division, he went to the Special Forces selection. He was assigned the job of Special Forces Medical Sergeant. After 4 years with Special Forces, he went to CAG, or, for the layman, Delta Force Selection, and was picked up. After that, his career became murky due to its clandestine nature. According to medical records and testimonies from his teammates, he had been a stellar soldier until around the 15-year mark. Tuck was sent for several evaluations with symptoms mimicking early-onset Alzheimer, although he was only 33. Later medical evaluation would diagnose him with moderate traumatic brain injury. Tuck's irrational behavior and unpredictable bouts of memory loss resulted in his unit giving him a desk job. He fought tooth and nail for a mentorship position, but was relegated to accountability for soldiers being medically discharged. I found myself wondering what had gone wrong. There were so many moments and events that went wrong, but was there a moment where he snapped, as they say? It was hard to fathom the man before me as the man responsible for such atrocities and yet still capable of doting on his son. Dear family, I've been wrestling with the two different aspects of who I am for a long time now. What they say about me is true. I am responsible for abducting Rosie and her death. I did deny her medical care because I was too selfish and scared I'd lose her. In the end, I lost her, and David lost his mother. I never physically hurt Rosie, though looking back, I might have hurt her psychologically. I met Rosie in the last year of my career. My team had abandoned me. They said I was no longer fit for duty and gave me a babysitting job to run out the clock. I saw Rosie on my first day on the job. She smiled at me, and that was it for me. Some people are just inherently good, and that was Rosie. I knew I had to introduce myself to her. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't make an effort. I quickly got on the good side of the 3 receptionists at the clinic, especially Gemma. Gemma was a good-hearted woman, and I suppose that's what drew Rosie to her as well. Gemma had been a model before she got married to a service member. She had modeled for a few tattoo and car magazines, she told me. One morning, about a month after I first saw Rosie, I saw my opening to introduce myself to her. I approached Gemma at the reception desk where she and Rosie were talking animatedly. "Miss Gemma," I greeted her. "Hey, First Sergeant," Gemma greeted warmly. I watched her briskly scroll through the day schedule, noting all the names of the soldiers belonging to me. "All of your boys have been taken back. We might have you out of here before noon," Gemma assured me. "No worries, Gemma," I chuckled. "I'm not here to bother you about that." "First Sergeant, have you met our newest physical therapist, Primrose Carter?" Gemma introduced. "First Sergeant Joseph Tucker Ryan," I introduced myself, extending a hand to Rosie. "Just call me Tuck. You too, Gemma. Call me Tuck." Rosie took my hand and gave a firm shake. "Rosie," she introduced herself. She had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. "Gemma, did my patient say why?" Rosie asked Gemma. "Rosie, I sent you a text about it. I swear, you never check your texts from me." Rosie let out a soft laugh, her light brown eyes sparkling. "Sorry, Gemma, you know I can't have my phone on me. I was waiting in the physical therapy room. I wasn't in my office." "You can't use that excuse off duty," Gemma teased. "I know, I'm not good at returning texts." Rosie laughed brightly. "Since you have a cancellation, maybe you can show me around the physical therapy room?" I asked. "Sure," Rosie replied, shrugging slightly. "Text me back," Gemma urged. Rosie gave Gemma a playful look of derision before swiping her badge and stepping through the security door between the reception area and the clinical offices in the back. Rosie met me in the lobby, swiping her badge, which granted us access to the physical therapy room. It was a miniature gym, complete with cardio, strength training, even yoga and Pilates equipment. "Have you ever had to do physical therapy before?" Rosie asked me. "Yes, ma'am," I answered honestly. "TBI." "Oh," she nearly whispered, a sympathetic look on her face. "Then you're familiar with all this." She waved a hand around her. "A little bit," I answered. I made my way to 2 stations with Wi-Fi set up and laughed a little. "Do you ever use this to play Wii Sports?" I asked. Rosie smiled and shook her head. "I've only used it for balance training." I can't recall what else we talked about, but that first introduction stuck in my mind because that was the beginning of our friendship. One late morning, as I was heading off to lunch, I saw Gemma, Rosie, and one of the male therapists sitting in the garden, eating, laughing and chatting. I considered just leaving them, but then I caught Rosie's eyes. I made a split-second decision to join them, and that was the best decision I ever made. It became part of my daily ritual to join Rosie, Gemma, and their friend for lunch. Rosie was always so kind and considerate. The first day, she shared her lunch with me. The next day, I brought her lunch as repayment. We kept going back and forth like that for the remainder of the year. Rosie kissed me once. We sat on the bumper of my car, shortly before I was scheduled to sign out on leave. "Thank you, Rosie. You've made my last year the best. I wish you'd come with me to Utah," I said. "Tuck, you know I can't come with you, but maybe one day I'll come visit you." "Why can't you come with me? Ditch the zero and get with the hero. Hell, you don't need this job. I've got enough money for the 2 of us. Put in your 2 weeks' notice. I sign out in 2 weeks. Rosie gave me a sad smile and shook her head. "You flirted with me all year long. I know you like me. What's the holdup? I'm out of the Army in 2 weeks. What are they going to do? Call me back to prosecute me for stealing another soldier's wife?" "Tuck, maybe once my divorce is final, we'll get back in touch. It isn't right to jump from one man to another. I need to work on myself first." "You're perfect, Rosie. Come with me." "No, Tuck, I can't do that. I've got a life here," Rosie replied. "Please think about my offer," I begged. I leaned in to put my arms around Rosie, and her lips grazed my right cheek. I took her face in my hands and planted a kiss on her lips. She kissed me back, hard, and in that moment, I thought maybe she would change her mind in 2 weeks. The morning before I signed out, I went to see Rosie, hoping to change her mind one last time. She wouldn't see me. She brushed me off and said, "Tuck, I've got a patient. I'll talk with you at lunch." I finished clearing and I came back to wait for Rosie. When she saw me, she excused herself from her friends and took me aside. "Come to say goodbye?" Rosie asked. "No, you know why I came to see you. I'm hoping you'd change your mind." She shook her head and gave me a sad smile. "No, Tuck, I haven't changed my mind. I already told you, once my divorce is final and I've had time to work on myself, I'll get in touch with you. That is, if you haven't already moved on," she finished with a playful titter. "What's there to work on, Rosie?" "You're a handsome man, Tuck. You'll find someone better, smarter, prettier out there. I've got to think about my future. If I put in my time here, I can retire with a good pension like you. When I retire in my 60s, I won't have to depend on anyone for anything." "Rosie, I'll take care of you. You won't have any wants or needs." "Tuck, I'm just another woman. There is nothing special about me. You'll meet someone else, I promise." "But Rosie, you're everything I want. If we have children one day, they'll be smart and beautiful. You're caring and nurturing. Our kids will be well cared for. That's what I want." "Tuck, you're being silly. I can't believe a man like you can have such silly dreams," Rosie said, dismissively. "Goodbye for now, Tuck. I'll stay in touch, I promise." "But how, Rosie?" "If it's meant to be, we'll find each other," Rosie assured. How silly, I thought. There is no such thing as fate or serendipity. A man is responsible for his own fate, I told myself. I traded my BMW in for a brand new pickup truck. I had no use for a car where I was going. I pulled into the employee parking lot and waited in the back. I'd had years to scout out the base, so I knew well where all the blind spots were. The clinic surveillance was child's play. When I saw Rosie get out of her car, I rolled my window down and waved her over. She was hesitant. I wasn't sure if she would even come talk to me. She walked over to the driver's side and gave me a weak smile. "Hey, Tuck, nice truck," she said softly. "Get in," I urged. She looked around the empty parking lot and gave a slight shake of the head. "I already told you, Tuck, I'm not coming with you." "Please, Rosie, hear me out." She grimaced and rocked back on her heels. "At least take my phone number or something." She relented and gave a slight nod. "Get in, sit with me a minute before I go." She reluctantly crossed the hood and opened the passenger door. She sat down beside me. "Can I have a goodbye kiss?" I asked. She averted her gaze and shook her head. "It was a mistake the first time, Tuck." "Does this mean you're going to stay with him?" "No, Tuck. We're getting a divorce for sure." I leaned in to kiss her, thinking she would resist. She didn't. I held her face and kissed her for a long moment. I reached into my back pocket and retrieved my wad of medical gauze, doused in ether. When I drew back, I replaced my lips with the gauze. Ether and chloroform take longer to work than in the movies and television. It felt like a lifetime watching Rosie gasp for a breath of fresh air. Rosie was small, so she didn't put up much of a fight. She slept until we were already across the state line. A part of me understands that what trust there was had been shattered in that moment. I couldn't envision a life without Rosie. Whenever Rosie came to, I gave her sips of water with crushed-up Tylenol PM. I knew I didn't need anything stronger. Rosie had mentioned once that she was highly sensitive to drugs. She needed Zofran if she had to take narcotics or anything strong. When Rosie came to in the cabin, she was groggy and disoriented. She could barely sit up in bed. "Tuck?" "Yeah, Rosie," I affirmed. "Where am I?" she asked, eyes unable to make sense of her surroundings. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hands, a gesture I would later see in David. "This is my cabin, our bedroom." "Tuck," Rosie began to whimper. "I don't feel good. I want to go home." "Rosie, I can't take you back. We're over 2,000 miles from Bragg." Rosie lurched forward and threw up on the floor. She fell back into the pillows and closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saw the first of what I would later call Rosie's dark mood. For several days later, Rosie gave me the silent treatment. She wouldn't eat or drink anything I brought her. "Rosie, I love you, I promise. I didn't drug anything," I assured, taking a bite of the sandwich I'd made and taking a sip of the glass of water on her nightstand. "Go away," she said quietly, rolling onto her side, her back to me. Later that day, Rosie came downstairs for the first time. She glared at me as she stepped into the kitchen. "Let me show you how to use the pump," I offered. I hurried to her side and showed her how to use the water pump. She filled up her glass and gulped down several glasses of water. She put the glass down on the counter and slowly made her way back upstairs. I made my way up to the bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed, studying Rosie's back. "Go away, Tuck," she murmured. "Rosie, I'm not going to hurt you. I would never hurt you. Any hope of us being on good terms, you've killed. Rosie, I promise, I can give you everything and anything you can dream of. What do you want?" "I want nothing from you." "Rosie, please don't be mad at me. Please, kiss me like you did before." "Go away, Tuck." I curled up beside her, but she pretended I wasn't there. Rosie, until David was born, was the only person to ever make me cry. Having Rosie upset with me was painful. Every evening I read to Rosie. I don't know if she listened, but I did it all the same. I talked to Rosie even though she never said anything back. Most of the time, she didn't even look my way. "Rosie, I'm getting ready to go to town for supplies. Make a list of the things you want and need," I urged, pushing a notepad and pencil toward her. She just sat, reclined against the headboard, unmoving. "Please, Rosie," I begged. She picked up the pencil and wrote, "Freedom," across the page. "But Rosie, you have freedom. You're not chained up or locked in this cabin. You can go and do anything you want." "Tuck?" I saw the cogs working in Rosie's mind. "Yeah, Rosie?" "We were friends, weren't we?" "Yes." "And you say you love me?" "Yes." "Have I wronged you, Tuck? What did I do to make you mad enough to kidnap me? What are you going to do to me? Are you going to kill me?" "No," I exclaimed. "I am not going to kill you. I love you, Rosie. I would never hurt you. I just don't understand why you would flirt and spend time with me, but when I offer you the world, you brush me off. I'm hoping that you'll eventually come around and love me in return. Wouldn't you feel better if you'd earned my love freely instead of in captivity?" I shook my head in disappointment, sure Rosie wasn't even looking at me. "You're not captive, Rosie. Look at you. You're free as a bird. I don't care if you never love me in return. I'll love you enough for the both of us." "Tuck, we're in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing but desert for 360 degrees. How is this not captivity?" I gave no response. "Tuck, please take me home." "Hell, you don't even have to take me back to Bragg. Just get me to the nearest town and I'll find my way home." "No, Rosie, I can't do that." "Please, Tuck, I won't tell anyone. Wouldn't you feel better knowing no one is looking for you?" "I know what you're doing, Rosie. You're trying to get inside my head. You're smart, but I was CAG. Rosie's eyes widened and she quickly crawled back on the bed as though I were a monster. I could see the pieces falling into place for Rosie, and a look of resignation fell over her face. You've planned this all out, didn't you? No one is going to find me, are they?" I shook my head. Rosie retreated back into her dark mood, angry and dejected all at once. I introduced Rosie to the animals in the barn. It was a relief to me when she jumped at the sight of my horse. She had gladly fed the chickens, pigs, and cows, but the horse clearly spooked her. I took her in my arms and held her fast. "Hey, Rosie, he's not going to hurt you," I murmured. "Tuck, I'm scared of horses." "Okay, let's go back to the other animals then." I watched as Rosie scattered scratch for the chickens. She had a way with animals. She was able to hand-feed a few chickens, and it made her smile. "This is all yours. Anything you could ever want. Just ask," I told her. She ignored me. She continued her mission of befriending the chickens. That evening I tried to kiss her, and she turned her face away from me, even pushing my face away. It broke my heart. I thought I'd made her happy enough with the animals. Clearly, I was wrong. That night I held her. "Rosie, can I make love to you?" I asked. "Do whatever you want, Tuck," she answered coldly. I turned her onto her back, and I tried kissing her again. She raised a hand and blocked my lips. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. "Is there anything I can do for you?" I asked. "Do whatever you want to do. Just don't ask me for input." She laid there, hands over her face. "I love you, Rosie," I whispered in her ear. "I love you too," she murmured through her fingers, though I knew she didn't mean it. I never understood why she said it. I understand on some level she was afraid of me, but I couldn't understand why. I'd never given her cause to be afraid of me in the year we'd been friends. I never even raised my voice at her. I left her alone when she told me to. I came running when she called. Afterwards, Rosie turned her back to me. That was how it was every night until she told me she was pregnant. After that news, she became easily irritable. She wouldn't let me get near her. When Rosie was about 6 months pregnant with David, she reached the peak of unhappiness. I'd come home from my monthly trip to town without oatmeal. Rosie balled up the list and threw it at me. She picked up a mug and threw it at me too, the mug shattering against the fireplace. I raised my hands to her, and the tears began falling from both our eyes. "Rosie, I'm sorry, I forgot your oatmeal." "You tell me I can have anything I want. I don't ask for much, Tuck. I only asked for fucking oatmeal, and that's the one thing on your list you didn't get. Are you fucking retarded, Tuck? Can't you read? Can't you remember oatmeal?" Rosie raged. "I'm sorry, Rosie. I wasn't always like this. I'm not retarded. I swear," I cried, unable to see her or anything around me. "There was a time when I was smart, Rosie. I have trouble reading sometimes. I have trouble remembering. You know that. I'm sorry, Rosie. I'll go back and get you some oatmeal right now." I started for the door. Rosie cut me off and made it out the door first. It was dusk, and she was headed toward the canyons, briskly stepping further and further from me. "Rosie, come back," I called to her. "Rosie, it's getting dark, and there are coyotes and panthers all over the place. Rosie, please come back." Rosie ignored me. I thought I'd lost Rosie for sure. She returned to the cabin a little after dark. We held each other like we were friends again. She knelt before me in the living room and took my face in her hands. "Tuck, love is built on trust and mutual respect. Once upon a time we were friends. Now we're on opposing sides. The woman who had once been your friend still wants the best for you. I hate to see you cry. I'm sorry I called you retarded. I know I hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry. You know I had no choice but to come back. But Tuck, you have a choice right now. Can you drive me to the nearest town and let me and this baby go free?" "No, Rosie. I can't let you go. That's my baby too, Rosie. I can't lose you and the baby. I'm sorry I took you. I'm sorry you can't trust me anymore. What can I do now?" "With each day that goes by, it'll be harder and harder to undo what's done, Tuck," Rosie whispered, a coldness in her eyes. "Had you been a little more patient and let me close one chapter of my life, I would have followed you anywhere, Tuck. Had you respected my answer, I could have loved you. All I see now is a monster." Rosie rose and walked upstairs, leaving me feeling hopeless. Rosie was right, but she was also wrong. There was no undoing what was done, not even if I would have let her go then. After that fight, I made sure to triple-check my list whenever I went to town. I would always bring back something extra that I thought Rosie might like. I bought her at least one dress each trip. I made sure to bring her a dessert, too. It seemed nothing would make Rosie happy again. I prepared for David's birth, stocking up on disposable and reusable diapers. I bought formula, clothes, and blankets, too. I checked and rechecked my aid bag, restocking gauze and disinfectants. Rosie went into labor on June 19th, and I delivered David on June 20th. I'd grown up delivering calves. Then I delivered babies in third-world countries as part of my job. I knew what I was doing. I wrapped him in cotton swaddle cloth and handed him to her, holding my breath. Rosie smiled at David, and I let my breath go. I had feared Rosie couldn't love David because he was partially mine. "Do you want me to feed him?" I asked, reaching for him. Rosie held David closer to her breast, a dark scowl on her face. I withdrew my hands. Rosie ignored me completely. She focused only on David. "Hi, David. I'm your mama," she whispered to him. "I love you more than the stars in the sky." She unbuttoned her dress and brought him to her left breast, and a wave of relief washed over me. David would have a mother who loved him. "Rosie, may I hold him?" I asked. She turned her eyes to me, cold and distant. No. I sat there with her until she delivered the placenta, and I was sure there would be no massive hemorrhaging. When afternoon turned to dusk, I was sure all danger had passed, and I left her alone. Everything seemed fine at first. Then a week after David was born, it became hard to wake Rosie. A fever set in, and I took over as primary caregiver to David. I gave him his first bath. I boiled water, mixed his formula, and fed him. I'd never felt at ease like I did in my role as David's father. "If you like me, David boy, am I beyond hope?" I asked him. He replied with a content grunt, and I smiled. I promised him I'd be good to him. I'd do better not to give him any reason to distrust me. "Tuck," Rosie called from upstairs. "Yeah, Rosie?" "Where is David?" She sounded panicked. I hurried up the steps, David and bottle in hand. I gingerly offered him to her. A look of relief fell over Rosie's damp face. She relaxed into the pillows and closed her eyes. I settled at the edge of the bed and finished feeding him. All I had to give to Rosie was Tylenol and Pedialyte. I made sure I took care of her and David. Eventually, she got better. Her fever broke after a day, and she was out of bed by the end of the week. She even allowed me to hold David if I asked, which I was grateful for. David made Rosie happy, happier than I'd seen her in over a year. She even went on a family hike with me and David when he was 3 months old. I carried David while we walked, and Rosie stayed by our side the whole time. "David has your smile," I noted. "I think that's all he got from me. He looks like you." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I asked, hoping for the ghost of who we once were to surface even just for a moment. "Tuck, I never thought you were ugly. That's not my problem with you. David is going to be very handsome when he gets older." I decided not to push further. I had David and I had Rosie, and that was good enough for me. We hiked until just before noon when we turned back to the cabin. "Rosie?" "Yeah, Tuck?" "Can I show David to my parents?" Rosie stopped dead in her tracks. She turned a fiery eye on me. "What did you say?" "Can I show David to my parents?" I repeated. "We're in Utah, aren't we?" she asked, livid. I swallowed hard and gave her a slight nod. "Where are we, Tuck? Where exactly are we?" Rosie demanded. We're on my family's ranch. We're a few miles from my parents' house," I replied, not daring to meet her eyes. "Son of a bitch," Rosie hissed under her breath. "How far am I from the nearest town?" "You're quite far. It's almost an hour if you drive. Please don't try to walk, Rosie. You'll never make it. It's the hottest time of the year, and you don't know which direction to go. I grew up here, and I wouldn't even try walking to town," I pleaded with her. I watched as Rosie's mind whirled to life. I could see her mentally mapping out where we stood, the distance to the cabin, and the cardinal directions. "Tuck," Rosie whimpered. "Rosie, please don't take David. He's all I have." "He's all you have? Tuck, your family is just a few miles from here. David is all I have," Rosie scolded. "Give me my son." Rosie wrestled the carrier from me and strapped a crying David to her chest. She briskly walked ahead of me toward the cabin. "Rosie, slow down." Rosie and David were both crying. "I wish I'd never said a word to you, Tuck. I wish I'd never set eyes on you. You're nothing but a liar. I hate you. However you sustained your head injuries, I wish it would have killed you." I sped up and took Rosie by the shoulders. "Rosie, please. I'll take you to town. Please. Just don't take David. If you take him, you might as well kill me now. He's the only thing worth living for," I begged. "Get out of my way, Tuck," Rosie screamed. She raised her left hand and landed a good hard slap on my face, bringing tears to my eyes. To be honest, Rosie's words hurt more than the slap. She had every right to be mad at me. I understand that, in retrospect. Look at us, Tuck. What do we do now? You've made a mess. We've got a baby living in a fucked up situation. Is this what you want for your son? Rosie, please don't use him as a pawn in this. I love you and I love David. Can't we call a truce? Can't we come to an agreement? Get out of my way, Tucker Ryan. David let out a shrill cry, his face turning crimson. I reached out for him, but Rosie batted my hands away. We made it back to the cabin. Rosie went upstairs and left me with David. I gave him a bath, a bottle, and put him down for a nap on the couch. Rosie came into the living room and sat beside me on the floor next to David. Tuck, you can always go on and have more babies. You know that, right? Rosie began. I shook my head. Rosie, why can't I keep David? You can have more babies. He's all I've got. I don't think you understand me, Tuck. You can always meet another woman and have babies with her. Hell, you can go sleep with the whole state of Utah and have more babies. He isn't all you've got. Tuck, David is the only baby I'm ever going to have. I carried him for 9 months. I gave birth to him. Do you understand how hard all that is? But Rosie, I made him too. Tuck, you don't understand how easy it is for you to go out there and make more babies. I bet you could find 100 women willing to have your baby. No, Rosie, I don't want any other baby. I want David. Tuck, I'm pretty sure in all your travels, you've probably got at least a few kids out there. Why don't you go find them? David lived inside my body, Tuck. He is literally part of me. You're just... I'm his father, Rosie. If I drive you to town and give you all the money in my bank account, will you promise not to take David away from me? I've got at least $500,000 in checking. You can have my truck. You can have my retirement account. That's another $500,000 at least. And you don't even have to withdraw from it because you can live off the interest alone. I'll even send you half my retirement check every month if I can only keep David. Tuck, Rosie sobbed. You can't possibly think I'd sell my son. And you can't possibly think I can just let him go. You should have thought about that before you created this whole mess. Again, we were at an impasse. Neither of us were willing to give up David. Rosie got sick again when David turned 1. I gave her Tylenol and Pedialyte like I did before. I made sure she was comfortable. Rosie? Yeah, Tuck? Can I bring David to see my parents? Rosie looked at me for the first time like I wasn't scum on the bottom of her boots. Will you promise to bring him back? Rosie asked. Yes, I promise. What time do you want me to bring him back? Bring him back before dark, please. My parents will probably want to give him cake. Is that okay? Do you want me to bring you a piece? I can bring a candle too, so you can watch David blow out his birthday candle. That's fine. He can have as much cake as he wants. No, I don't want a piece of cake. Take a picture for me, please. Would you like to come with? No, I'm not feeling good. I know, I said, wiping her sweaty brow. The Tylenol was working. She felt cooler. I wish you would come with. I wish you could be there, I whispered. I love you, Rosie. I've always loved you. I'll always love you, even if you choose to leave. I'm not going to leave, Tuck. I can't leave David. But don't you love me back? Rosie shook her head. I can't love you, Tuck. I rose, feeling heavy. I left Rosie to sleep. I picked David up out of his crib and strapped him to my chest. Together, we saddled up the horse and rode west to my parents' house. David loved his grandparents from the get-go. He wasn't their first grandchild, but they'd waited 38 years for me to have my first kid. My mother was crazy about him. It had been almost 10 years since her last grandchild was born. He's so handsome, Tuck, my mother crooned. Where is Rosie? My father asked. Rosie is sick. "She's at the cabin," I answered. "Maybe you should bring Rosie and David up to the house. Rosie has been sick an awful lot since you both moved into the old cabin. There is a reason people died earlier back in the day, son." "Look, David loves watching cartoons. You guys can't even get electricity or cable out there. Think about it. You guys can have your own wing. You guys can stay with us until you decide to build you a new house," my father urged. "No, Dad, we like it out there. No cable, no internet. That's what I like." "Well, what about David, son? You might be all right without internet and cable, but not too far in the future, David is going to need all that." "So I'll get him a horse and teach him to ride. He'll come up here if he needs internet or cable." "Well, the offer is always open. Talk it over with Rosie, huh?" "Will do, Dad." David ate a large piece of cake, watched his first episode of Looney Tunes, and then we returned to the cabin. My mother printed out several pictures of David's first birthday, and I gave them to Rosie. She sat up in bed and smiled at the pictures, while David slept beside her in our bed. She laughed as she studied the picture of David, smearing blue buttercream frosting across the lower half of his face. "Can you get me a frame for this picture the next time you go into town?" Rosie asked. I smiled and nodded eagerly. "My parents got him a bunch of books," I began. "Rosie, what do you think about getting David a horse?" Rosie studied my face, and I could see her weighing her options. I saw her considering her escape plan, and it made me a little sad to know she was still thinking about escaping and taking David with her. "Sure, if you want," Rosie agreed. "You're thinking about using David's horse to escape, aren't you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, Tuck," Rosie admitted. "Once you leave, are you going back to him?" I asked. "No, Tuck," Rosie answered softly. "He has probably moved on. Remember, we'd already filed for divorce. Do you think that there might be a chance that if you leave and take David with you, that you might change your mind and come back?" Rosie slowly shook her head. "Is it because you think I'm retarded?" "No, Tuck, I just said that because I was mad at you. I know you're very smart, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to do all the things you did in your career. I already told you, love is built on trust and mutual respect. If you take David away from me, will you tell him about me?" Rosie shook her head. "I understand," I said through tears. "Will you take my money? I don't want David to go without." Rosie shook her head again. "But Rosie, can you provide for him on your own?" "Of course I can, Tuck. I was a physical therapist. I won't have any trouble providing for him." "What about medical care? Will you have insurance?" "Yes, Tuck." "Okay, Rosie. Give me 1 more year with David, and I won't stand in your way. I'll give you the keys to my truck, and you guys can go wherever you want. Tuck, the longer you spend with him, the harder it's going to be. You do know that, right?" I nodded. "Maybe by then he'll remember me. Maybe he'll come back someday." Rosie didn't say anything more. She was happy. She'd won. Rosie ran through the front door, a look of horror on her face. She marched to the corral and climbed over the top rung. "Tuck!" Rosie shouted, marching toward me. "Get my son off that thing." The horse snorted and stomped its 4 hooves. "Whoa," I whispered, brushing his nose. "Rosie, David is fine. I was his age when I had my first pony ride. Give me my son." "Rosie." I held my hands out to her, grasping for her hands. "Mama," David called to Rosie, a smile on his face. "Hi, baby," Rosie cooed. "Look, Rosie, he's having fun. Tuck, get my son off that thing." I knew better than to argue with Rosie. The power dynamics had tipped in Rosie's favor. I lifted David off the horse and handed him to Rosie. "Dada!" David protested, pointing at me. "Come on, baby. No dada. Breakfast." I watched as Rosie rushed David into the cabin. I gave the horse a pat and led him back into the old barn. I took his saddle off and his halter. "Another time, bud," I told him. I headed into the cabin, met by Rosie's glare. She was feeding David oatmeal. "I saved you some," Rosie said, curtly. I made my way back to her and knelt before her. "Rosie, I'm sorry I took you. I know you'll never forgive me. Thank you for giving me David." Rosie's face was unreadable. "I don't want him to be anything like you." I nodded and rose to my feet. I swallowed the sadness rising in my throat. "I wasn't always like this, Rosie." Rosie cut her eyes at me and resumed feeding David. "Dada!" David called to me. My heart felt lighter and I smiled at him. Even a monster like me can't resist David. The days, weeks, and months passed too quickly with David in my life. He turned 2. Rosie and I celebrated his birthday together. I made sure to take several pictures of them, thinking I'd never see them again. "I'm pregnant," Rosie announced. "What? Are you sure?" "Yes, Tuck, I'm sure," Rosie spat. "How far along?" "I don't know. 6 months, maybe. I don't exactly have a sonogram to give you." "Rosie, I'm so sorry I wronged you. Here." I offered Rosie the key to my truck. "I promised you last year I was done holding you hostage." Rosie gingerly reached for the key and snatched it out of my hand. "Which direction do I go?" Rosie asked, determined to leave. "You can't make it on foot. It's 3 miles to the truck. You're pregnant and you've got David. Do you want any of his things?" I asked, my voice breaking. "No." "I'll saddle up the horse." I turned away from David, not wanting his last memory of me, if he would even remember me, to be the broken, unstable man I'd become. I saddled up the horse and brought him to the front of the cabin, the porch giving Rosie a little lift closer to the saddle. She stepped out, eyeing the horse wearily, David on her left hip. I reached for David and motioned for Rosie to mount. She struggled, unable to mount. "I love you, Daddy," David said, putting his arms around my neck. "I love you too, buddy," I whispered into his hair. I wondered if I smelled like that when I was his age. He smelled like the ranch. Fresh air, spring water, a little earthy from the red dust that was easily disturbed by the slightest breeze. I set David down on the porch and moved toward Rosie. She relented and let me help her into the saddle. I handed David to her, and she held tight to him. I gestured for her to take hold of the horn for stability, and she did. I led the horse around the cabin, and we started off toward the west. "Daddy," David called to me from atop the horse. "I Lone Ranger." I wiped my tears before turning and smiling at him in acknowledgement. "Yes, you are, bud," I called back to him. "Tuck," Rosie called to me. "Yeah, Rosie?" "Turn around." I turned an eye toward her. I brought the horse to a halt. "I didn't want to spoil David's birthday, Tuck. I don't think this one is going to make it." "Rosie, what's wrong?" "I've been having contractions all day. We need to get back to the cabin." I turned the old horse around and led him back to the corral. I took Rosie off first, then David. I offered Rosie an arm and took David's hand in my other. We hurried back to the cabin, and I left Rosie and David in the living room while I put the horse away. Rosie let me hold her while David played around us. "Do you want me to drop David off at my parents'?" I whispered to Rosie. "No," Rosie murmured. "Tuck, I'm scared." David looked at us and smiled his mother's crooked smile. He knelt down before his mother and put a hand under her chin in the same manner she did when he cried. "Mama, I love you," I love you too, baby. Davy, bud, can you grab your crayons and draw Mama a picture? I asked. David eagerly reached under the couch and pulled out the vinyl bag with his art supplies. He unzipped it and chose a piece of yellow construction paper. He chose a brown crayon and began an attempt at an oblong shape. What is that, buddy? I prompted. Horsey, David replied, as though I should have known. I watched as he drew another oblong shape above the first and then two smaller oblong shapes. Daddy, Mama, Bud, David explained. That's beautiful, baby, Rosie encouraged. David smiled as he continued his abstract drawing of his world. We sat in the living room until David fell asleep. It wasn't until close to midnight that Rosie had the baby. I took the towel outside and buried it quickly. I didn't want Rosie or David to see it. I padded the couch with all the towels we had in the cabin, and I helped Rosie onto it to get some rest. I reclined in the recliner, holding David. Rosie and I came to a silent truce too late. Rosie got really sick. She would get better and then get sick again. The day before she died, she made me take David to my parents' house. I gave my mother the camera with the pictures from David's birthday. She printed out the photos for David to hold at night. Rosie, you need antibiotics, I whispered to her. Tuck, Rosie murmured. I wish things could have been different. Me too, Rosie. I'm sorry I took you. There are no excuses for what I did. Promise me you'll take care of David. You know I will. He's everything to me. You're a good dad, Tuck. You're a good mom too, Rosie. Can you do me one favor? Anything, Rosie. Can you promise me you'll go get treated for your TBI? I don't want David to lose his dad too. Take care of yourself, please. No more impulsive, desperate acts, huh? Rosie gave me a weak smile, and for a moment I felt like I had the first time she'd ever spoken to me. Even after all the shit I've put her through, Rosie could still smile. Why are you talking like that, Rosie? I'm going to get you some antibiotics and you'll be all right. Tuck, I forgive you. I meant what I said. If you would have given me a little time, I would have followed you anywhere. I'm sorry, Rosie. I cried like the child I'd become. Rosie, maybe I should have followed you instead of forcing you to follow me. You're a strong person. Look at you. You can still smile. Rosie touched my cheek with a clammy hand, and she laughed through her tears. Move forward, Tuck. Don't look back. We all just want to feel like we belong. I don't blame you. If you keep getting hung up on what could have been, your career not going the way you wanted, not meeting me halfway, you'll miss David growing up. For David, get some help. You don't want to do or say something you might regret with him. Do you hear me, Tuck? Rosie asked, raising my chin to look at her like she did with David. You have such a big heart, Rosie. I only wanted to be a part of your world. David has better coping skills and impulse control than me, Rosie. What if when you're gone, he realizes I'm not as smart or as good a person as he thinks I am now? I'm going to make you better. Hang tight, and I'll be back. David is the highlight of my life. Please take good care of him and his daddy. Rosie put an arm around me when it should have been the other way around. I promise, Rosie. I promise, I cried as she rubbed my back. Can I go get you some medicine, please? Rosie nodded and let me go. I kissed David goodnight before my mother put him to bed and I drove to Salt Lake City. I spent the entire night at the Salt Lake City VA's emergency room. I left around 9 a.m. I got home around noon. I tried to get Rosie to drink some water, but she threw it up. I tried to get her to take at least 1 tablet of antibiotic, but she refused. I held Rosie until daybreak. She was gone by then. I waited until around 10, and I decided I didn't want to put her in the ground. I'd kept her imprisoned long enough. She wouldn't like to be buried. I don't know why, but I had the idea of putting Rosie in a wooden casket filled with salt, so I built one and used all the salt from our cabin in the barn. I kept her in an old shed far from the cabin. The spring before David's 3rd birthday, I moved Rosie to Red Cliffs, to a spot well off the beaten path. Then, the summer after David's 4th birthday, the group of biologists stumbled upon Rosie. Rosie was right. I made a mess of everything. If I could have waited, maybe we would have ended up happily ever after. Then again, maybe we never would have had David. There is no point in playing the what-if game with myself. Things are the way they are. I know David is in good hands with his grandparents. He will be loved. Maybe David is my way of giving them a second chance at a better son. My dad was a wonderful father to me. Maybe David is better off with him as his role model, instead of me. I'm sorry for all I've done and the mess I've created. I will always love you, David. You are in better hands than you would have ever been with me. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm the reason you don't have a mother. I'm the reason you don't have a father. Love always, Joseph Tucker Ryan. Jack and I looked at each other after reading Tuck's letter, reviewing the evidence, and listening to every legal expert argue over what to do next. We were both in tears. Jack shook his head and gave me a questioning look. "How do things like this keep happening?" Jack asked me. I was flabbergasted. If Jack, 10 years older than me, more time on the force, didn't have an answer, how was I supposed to? When we ask people to do horrible things in the name of their country, how do we expect them to ever be normal? Tuck was taught those skills, Jack. In the Army, we're all taught to trust one another. What is wrong with us human beings? I asked both Jack and myself. I can't stop thinking about David, Jack. Jack nodded in agreement, dropping his head to his palm. What do we even call this? Negligent homicide? Kidnapping, rape, and first-degree homicide? Jack asked me. A human tragedy was all I could muster. Can you be honest with me, Beth? Of course, Jack. Do you hate Tucker Ryan? I shrugged. I don't know. I don't condone what he did to poor Rosie. Why do I feel bad for everyone involved? I know what it's like to want to belong like Tuck. I know what it's like to have dreams like Rosie. We only got one side of the story. A part of me wishes we knew how Rosie felt about the whole situation. Then again, I'm selfishly glad I don't know. I don't know if I could forgive Tuck if it were me. Poor Rosie. I can't imagine the amount of betrayal she felt. Is it worse to be betrayed by someone you know, or a complete stranger? I don't know how much of Tuck's story is even grounded in reality, Jack. I mean, all evidence supports Tuck's story, but he was a little gone in the head by the time we talked to him. This case is so messed up. I sniffled and wiped away my tears. The real victim in all this is David, isn't it? I wonder how the Ryans are going to explain to him who he is when he gets older. I thought leaving the Army behind, I'd be able to identify less with cases, Jack. How do you do it? Jack just shook his head. You do just the best you can, Beth. That's all you can do. You make good friends and you talk about it and then try to move on. I nodded, glad that I had Jack as my mentor instead of some egotistical jackass. I clasped my hands before me, and then I noticed my KIA bracelet, the name of a fellow CID agent etched into the black powder-coated stainless steel, along with the CID crest. Holy crap, I gasped. What's up, Beth? I pointed to my KIA bracelet. That's how he figured out I'm former military. Jack gave me a sad smile. Our experiences are etched into our very being, whether we notice it or not, my friend. For some, it makes us stronger. For others, it breaks us.